Greetings, I'm Sophis. Today I bring you the Knights of the Cosmos build. With the new Secrets of the Archmages DLC, there are more benefits to going into hybrid affinity combos, thanks to the new Tier 5 tome and the rework that the Empire Tree got in the free update. With this faction, the goal was to get as many benefits as possible out of the tree and the Tome of the Cosmos. This faction also better fulfills a long-standing attempt to get more use out of the Tome of Alchemy and its afflicted status. Tome of the Cosmos facilitates any build with it due to the Cosmos Awakening enchantment, giving most of the units you can field the ability to deal all damage types with their attacks. Considering both these things, the natural response is to build something on the basis of a Cult of Tyranny Dark Culture. Units-wise, most of your roster gets a benefit from the enchantments one way or another. As far as cultural units go, Warlocks will be in your army compositions from start to finish, thanks to their reliable damage and abilities. Immortals also have some use, but eventually you'll want to replace them for either Tyrant Knights or the new Tome unit, the Temptress. Temptresses function as a frontline in spite of not being very good defensive units, due to their ability to charm and unleash your enemies against one another. Their domination ability makes enemies go berserk, so be careful in how you use them. They get another action when charmed, but don't get movement, so a berserk melee unit with no adjacent enemies will attack your Temptresses. The best isolated enemy to charm this way is a ranged unit, since then they will fire on any enemies in range. This also makes the faction fairly decent at capturing enemies if you want some variety in your roster. Later on, as you get more enchantments across the board, even the Afflictor from Alchemy becomes viable, despite being a fairly weak ranged unit otherwise. Frenzying Imbuement covers Warlocks, Afflictors and Temptresses, giving them Frenzy and Lifesteal, on top of the Strength Sapping Imbuement from Burning Passion. This means that any unit with repeating attacks gets 2 stacks of strengthened each hit. On top of that, they will get the Accursed Imbuement from Calamity for the Ghostfire debuff and more Frostfire damage. Temptresses and Afflictors also benefit from Resonant Imbuement, giving more debuffs on the enemy. It's worth noting that if you feel that you can spare the Imperium, you can also substitute your Warlocks for the Geomancers, although I would make such replacements sparingly, as this build wants as much Imperium as you can spare to get all the benefits in the Empire Tree. All your form units benefit from extra damage based on terrain due to geomantic crystallization. This helps the Affliction strategy, keeping it from being too reliant on the late game benefit of Tome of the Cosmos, even if it is an imperfect solution. Much later, your faction will also get Fateful Imbuement, increasing critical hit chance across the board. But this will be far into the late game, as the tome setup requires extra tomes after the tier 5 to get the build to its maximum potential. One thing Dark Culture lacks is a proper support unit, and you will only get oracles much later on. Until then, unless you charm enemy supports with your Temptresses, you'll rely on the fairies from Tome of the Sprite to be your healers. Ruler-wise, you have to go with a Chaos Dragon due to affinity restrictions. Build it however you prefer to run your Dragon Rulers. With heroes, I would highly recommend trying out the new Grimoire weapons that magic units got. These permit magic-wielding classes to act as artillery pieces thanks to the very long range on their strike. Warlocks can mark an enemy, then hit it from afar, rarely needing to move whilst dealing high damage on the battlefield, which plays really well with the debuff focus of the build. Also, due to being a magic weapon, Grimoires have the option to get cosmic damage, dealing 3 out of the 6 damage types in the game, which you can then complement with signature skills to make your heroes deal most of the damage types for the sake of Affliction, physical being the one exception. Elementalists also work just fine thanks to their area damage and crowd control, and Ritualists greatly help the otherwise lacking support on the Dark Culture roster, as do caster-focused Battle Saints. Looking into the society and form traits, we are of course playing a Cult of Tyranny dark culture, with the Vigilante Knights and the Empire of the Cosmos society traits, thus the build name, Knights of the Cosmos. This combination permits a steady source of Imperium to purchase all sorts of benefits from every branch of the Empire tree, as well as unlock tome restrictions to apply the necessary tome setup. Form trait-wise, given the effectiveness of our magic-oriented units and heroes, as well as our tier 4s being both a support and a battle mage, arcane focus makes much sense, coupled with keen-sighted for better accuracy. The last form trait is flexible, but adaptable is a pretty good one. Now let's look into the tomes. We start with Tome of the Sprite, one of the new tomes. You get Captivating Lights at the start, and I would recommend prioritizing both the Summon Sprite and Catnap researches. One gives you either an early battle mage or a healing support that will help you through the early fights, and the other will make your early armies less dependent on your provinces to heal between battles, making exploration further from your cities easier. Fairy Dust is quite reliable as an enchantment, giving a free usability that has some randomness to it, but can get your units out of a bind. If your support or mages get locked in melee, a good cast of Fairy Dust can blind its assailant, letting them retreat without retaliation and then hit the enemy back. It can also be used to prime enemies for other attackers, making them distracted and more vulnerable by removing their retaliation attacks. Lastly, go for Fey Bond. Extra status resistance is always good, and morale goes a long way to help critical hits in combat. Next, get Tome of Alchemy. From this one, the two important researches are Disperse Afflicting Miasma and the Afflictor. You'll make a fairly regular use of the first, to greatly increase debuffs on the enemy and let you hit them harder. The Afflictors, on the other hand, become more useful the later on you go into the build, after a lot of bonuses have stacked up. I would also recommend grabbing Anti-Magic Tincture due to the lack of support units on the Dark Culture roster to clear negative statuses on your units. We start tier 2 with the new tome, Burning Passion. This tome is fairly loaded with good options, but there are 4 that stand out. First, the Temptress unit. We want to replace our frontline with them eventually, and they will only get better as the enchantments pile on. I've already explained their benefit in disrupting enemy formations, and they do an alright job holding the line, though be very careful as they are not meant to be shield walls. Part of their value as line holders come from the units they charm. Next, the Strength Sapping Imbuement is very strong, helping stack weakened on the enemy units as well as giving yours strengthened. Blazing Aura gives your front line a little extra damage and a debuff to punish melee attackers, and the Fiery Heart transformation increases their critical hit chance as well as giving your units a very useful immunity to fire hazards. After this, we go for Tome of the Construct. This was a tricky choice for Tome, but it is here for the sake of affinities and unlocking tome restrictions. The benefits from this one are the same as always: the cascading command spells, compounding defense, and the linked minds transformation. Tier 3 is where we get an improvement to the playstyle of the faction. Geomancy is the midpoint of the build, giving extra damage channels to help with afflictions through the major transformation and extra debuffs thanks to its enchantment. Also, at this point you get more useful summons than the sprites thanks to Summon Elemental, helping you bolster your ranks in an emergency. The Geomancer will be a good upgrade for your warlocks, but recruit them sparingly due to the Imperium requirements of this build. Next, we get Tome of the Cold Dark. In a build focused on afflictions, and with the affinity requirements of the Cosmos build, it is hard to pass up the tome that has Flash Freeze. -5 status resistance to all enemies helps lend debuffs by an incredible margin, making it even easier for your units to debuff the enemy without them being able to resist. Other than that, the Frostling transformation gives them immunity to being frozen, and Marching Winter can help you deal with unfavorable terrain like ashlands from disrupting the stability in your cities. Besides, with the benefits of the Tome of Geomancy, fighting in an Arctic terrain means getting frozen as a debuff to use against enemy forces. At tier 4, I would recommend starting with Nature's Wrath. With the changes to the tome, we really want its benefits for our faction. Frenzying Imbuement should be your first research if possible, as it will greatly increase the damage potential and survivability of your units. This on its own is plenty of reason, but we also get the Volve from this tome. This means high tier units which can already be debuffed from Flash Freeze as well as other negative effects from the rest of your units can then easily be turned into harmless tier 1 animals, quickly changing the tide of battle. Another synergy comes from having Temptresses in the faction, which can then charm these low tier animals. If you win the battle before the Berserk devolved unit dies, you can then recruit whatever high tier unit it was into your faction. Up next we want Tome of Calamity. Even though this tome has been a little nerfed in this patch, its benefits are still very good, and what we want out of this is the same as always. A Cursed Imbuement to help with damage and debuffs, then Accursed Armors to increase the defense on our front line. Finally, we get to the Tome of the Cosmos. Obviously, you'll want everything from this tome, but Cosmos Awakening is the big priority, as it will enable your units to deal all sorts of affliction and will get quite the damage boost out of it. The Prismatic Tower is the reason this build was tricky to balance, but ultimately the idea is to get all of its benefits by having every affinity reach at least 5, giving you plenty of resources in your throne city. The Avatar of the Cosmos is a good summon. There's little more to say to that, other than the fact that balancing all the affinities of this build lets you get the most out of this unit. Of course, due to its multiple damage types, it works really well with afflicted enemies. Contrary to usual builds, we're not quite done. There are still 2 tomes left for this build to be complete. At this point, you need to go back to tier 3, and from there, grab Tome of Prophecies. It will be very late in the game, but you will finally have a higher tier unit through the Oracle, as well as Fateful Imbuement, further increasing the critical hit chance of your units. You'll also want Prescient Circlets and Battle Divination out of this, especially since at this point, you more than likely can cast in the first turn of combat. Then, to finish the build, we go all the way back to tier 1 with Tome of Discipline. You should have 6 affinity in Shadow and then 5 in all the others by this point. From this tome, you'll want the usual, Focus Aim and Empowered Strikes, as well as Inner Mastery. Though at this point, this is just extra benefits, as the core of the build will have been completed for a while. And that's the build. A bit unorthodox, but very fun and strong in play. I was a little uncertain of it at first, but I do think the debuff focus goes a long way to make it viable. It is much stronger in the player's hand than the AI, since it'll never know how to apply debuffs or take advantage of them as well as you do. So it isn't much of an auto-resolve focused build. That's what I have for you today. I hope you're having a good day and see you in the next one.